Well, it gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome back to the show a fan favourite. It's been far too long since she's been on the podcast. She's been doing lots of other big name podcasts, Rest is History, Science of Learning. It's a bit of a come down for her, but she's here. Daisy Christodoulou. Hey, Daisy, how are you?
Yeah, really good, thanks. Great to see you, Craig, yeah.
Yeah, you too. Right, Daisy, if anyone hasn't heard of you, let's bring them up to speed. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm the Director of Education at No More Marking. We provide schools with online comparative judgment writing assessments, and I'm the author of 3 books about education, including 7 myths about education, and 1 book about football as well.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I always, whenever I share one of your articles on my newsletter, I always call you the Queen of Assessment. But I think now Queen of AI, right? Like you're all in it, and you need some kind of rebrand. So we've got something in common here. We both have AI in our first names. Have you picked up on this? So you need like the D-A-I-Z. You need a bit of a rebrand there. Could be. Have you ruled that out?
But yes, that's a good point. Yeah.
There you go. You have that one for free, Daisy. You have that for free. Right. So let's get your personal history with AI.
Yeah.
So were you an early adopter, and what role would you say it plays just in your personal day-to-day life?
Yeah. Do you mean like an early adopter, I guess, in my personal life of large language models?
Yeah, and ChatGPT, were you on it like the day of release? What was your history?
I'll tell you our sort of large language model origin story. Look, because we're so No More Marking, we do online writing assessment, and we use a technique called comparative judgment. And up until the kind of latest class of large language models, we were using totally 100% human judgment. But like, if you're in the world of assessing writing, you've got to be, one thing that's always kind of been on the radar is, well, what if the machine can do it for you? And when I started at No More Marking, I sort of joined in 2017, and talking to my colleague Chris before that in 2015, 2016, he said, like, eventually machines will do the job, they will mark writing. He said, but that's 20 years away. And that was in about 2016, 2017. And we kind of felt that was where we were. So if you remember, ChatGPT 3 launched in November 2022, at the end of November 2022. At the start of November 2022, at No More Marking, we had this big kind of strategy discussion where we were looking to the future, like, what does the future hold? And we spent quite a bit of time at that discussion looking at handwriting recognition, which is another like big part of the jigsaw piece, the jigsaw. And we concluded at the end of that week, it was still like 10 years away. So I guess
why was that, Daisy? Was it just like the results were just rubbish with that?
Well, yeah. So I can literally remember the research we did for this meeting, and we were, like I say, this is a big part of like what we do. We've always tried to stay ahead of it. And where we thought we were at the start of November 2022, in terms of handwriting recognition, is the major handwriting recognition tools at that point. What they were essentially doing is they were for historical manuscripts. So if I give like a simplified example, you've got a 400-page historical manuscript in one person's handwriting. And what you could do is you would take the first 20 pages, you would train an AI model on those 20 pages, and then it would transcribe the other 380 for you. And so that was kind of where the world was in early November 2022. And what we wanted was something completely different. Like, what we have is not one 400-page manuscript in one person's handwriting. We have like 2 million pieces of writing by 2 million different students. Yeah. So we can't train it on like 10% of those and get it to recognize the rest. So when we were kicking this around, as I say, beginning of November 2022, we were like, it's still not there. There's nothing there that's really going to help us. And I think if you'd asked us then on the broader, will machines be able to mark writing, we'd have said, yeah, it's like, it's going to happen, but like it's 10, 15 years off. And the book I wrote, so my colleague Chris has been on, ahead of this, on this for longer than me, but I wrote a book in 2020 about education technology, and I had a chapter on AI and AI assessment in that. And I pointed out that AI essay markers, they go back to 1960s. Like the first AI essay auto marker, people are always really shocked when I say this, it's 1968, right? England are world football champions when the first AI essay automarker comes along, right? You know, Bobby Moore is in his heyday. Oh, I'll shut up now. It's called Project Essay Grade. And, you know, we can go into that in a bit more detail if we want. Like, in some ways it works really well. Obviously, in some ways it really doesn't. Otherwise, we'd all be using it. So the point is,
Daisy, go on, give us a bit of that. Give us a bit of...
All right, Project Essay Grade. Should we do Project Essay Grade? Yeah. So, again, like, sort of simplified, sort of early AI essay automarker summary. This early essay automarker, in some ways, like, you look at the superficial statistics of it, it's amazing. And one of the reasons it's amazing is one of the reasons why all technology is amazing. The reason why technology can always outstrip humans is humans are really inconsistent and unreliable. And when technology generally, and actually LLMs have complicated this, but generally speaking, technology is really consistent and reliable.
Yeah.
So people always make the mistake of going, oh, the technology makes that error, it makes that error, it makes that error. It's like, yeah, okay, it can make all those errors, but you can turn the handle. Once you've got it working, you can turn the handle with technology and it will crank everything out for a really low cost. Right? It's very scalable. Whereas human beings are not scalable. Like, we're tired, we get fatigued. If you want to bring on new humans, you have to train them up. So a couple of amazing things about this early essay automarker. First of all, it was consistent, internally consistent. And what I mean by that, if you gave it 10 essays to mark on Monday, and then you came back and gave it the same 10 essays on Friday, it would give them the same mark each time. And the thing I always say to people is be honest with yourself. And I know you obviously, Craig, you're a math teacher, but any kind of extended written assessment, if you ask, if you mark, 10 of them on a Monday and you come back and mark them again on a Friday, be honest with yourself. Are you going to give them the same mark each time? And generally speaking, when I ask people this, they'll go, yeah, okay, I get it. I probably wouldn't. And there's a lot of research on this. And I think it's such an important point to stress because everyone thinks the issue with assessment and assessment consistency is that people disagree with each other. So everybody thinks the problem is Daisy's marking the essays, Craig's marking the essays, and Daisy and Craig disagree. And the problem is, what we've got to resolve is either Daisy's right or Craig's right. Yeah. Like, who's right?
Yeah.
And actually, that is part of the problem. So part of the problem is Daisy and Craig will disagree. But actually, like, an even bigger problem is that Daisy will disagree with herself. And Craig will disagree with himself.
Yeah.
So even when we're having the argument about Daisy and Craig disagreeing, actually, to what extent are Daisy and Craig's disagreements, like what they're arguing about, even stable? Ask them a week later, might they have just completely taken the opposite sides in this argument? And this is the thing that makes, like, marking really tricky.
Yeah, and just on that, Daisy, you get that in maths as well. Any question that's like a 3 mark or a 5 mark, it's all kicking off, right?
So the worst kind of questions, again, I'm on a tangent here, but the worst kind of questions for me are those 3 markers. I've got examples of them in maths.
Yeah.
Like the 2, 3, 4 marker. Yeah. I've sat in maths moderation meetings where people have argued over those.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at least with the English ones, when you're arguing, well, like at least we're arguing over for like a 40 marker here. Like in maths, you're having the same level of argument for 3 marks. And you can just assess maths with right, wrong. Like you can. Like, and we've done a load of work with no more marking where you assess it with more open-ended questions. But the 3 markers are the worst of both worlds because they don't give you the precision and reliability of the 1 marker. And they don't actually give you the open-ended exploratory thought of the 40 marker. So they're the worst of both worlds. You're having 20-minute arguments over 3 marks. Yeah. So you're right. Like, this isn't just an English question. It's maths as well. So go back to my point. Why do these early essay automarkers work so well? Or look so good? One of the reasons is, unlike humans, they're really consistent. And that is not a trivial thing. That's quite important. So that's like strike 1 on the early essay automarker kind of.
Just Daisy, what are they doing? How are they marking these essays?
Well,
is it like typed or something?
Right. So this is it. Yeah. So the early ones, they're not transcribing handwriting, they're typed. But this is where it gets interesting. Okay. So I'll say one more good thing though about the stats.
Oh, it keeps.
So the other good thing. So one good thing about the stats is they're very reliable. The other good thing is actually when you then sort of say, are they in agreement with the humans? Yeah, there's some pretty good evidence there too. So I think, again, from this very early model, what you were seeing was if you took the AI grade, the AI score, it would actually agree with the average of all the humans, and it would have a better agreement with the human average than any individual human. Okay, so that is massive. So you look at all of that and you go, this system is a winner. But the obvious question is, if it was 1968, why are we not all using it? Okay.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets interesting. And it's your question, like, how is it doing this? So I'm going to simplify massively here. So this is basically what it's doing is it's marking on very superficial features. So I'm going to simplify a bit here because this is not necessarily exactly specifically the issue with Project Essay Grade, but just simplified example of what I mean by marking on superficial features. Yeah. Basically, you can set up a model like that. You can set up an AI essay auto marker, very, very simple one, to mark just on the length of an essay.
Okay.
Right. And if you set up an auto marker to mark on the length of an essay, it will look really good. It will be consistent, and actually it will get most of the grades right.
Right.
And the reason is there is a correlation between length and quality. There is a correlation. But what we know is that it's not causation, right? The length doesn't cause the quality, but there is a really strong correlation. So Cambridge Assessment did some interesting stuff on, I think, a couple of public exams, analysis of a big corpus of responses a few years back. And I think they found an unbelievably tight correlation between length and quality, right? But we know that correlation is not causation. And we also know that it is then ridiculously easy to game.
Yeah.
So your second order effect is once people know, essentially, this is a model that is heavily weighted towards length, you can just write the same sentence over and over. And in fact, there was a study in 2001, so fast forwarding a bit now, but one of, a later model that found you could write the same paragraph 37 times and you would get the top mark. Okay. So this is very important, what I'm talking about, because it goes to the heart of AI in a whole range of fields. Because you have early AI rules-based methods, which ultimately, when you unpack them, you can see they are relying heavily on surface features. And that might be fine in a low-stakes environment, but in any kind of like moderately high-stakes environment, the second order effect is that the model will collapse, right? And so that's a major issue. So you've got this fundamental issue of correlation and causation, which goes to the heart of how we use AI in a whole range of fields. So not just education. So you actually see it a lot with facial recognition technology. So facial recognition technology at airports, you put your passport down, the camera scans your face, and it's recognizing your face and matching it to the passport. Now, the interesting thing about this is I've been talking about rules-based AI models. And at least with rules-based AI models, you can unpick their process. And when you go under the hood, you can see what's going on. And with the marking model I was talking about, you can see, well, it's weighting towards length. Actually, the new deep learning models, you can't even go under the hood and see what they're doing. Like, the crazy thing about the new deep learning models is that they will often get you better outcomes and better performances, but you don't know how they're doing it. But the major risk there is, obviously what you want to hope is they're doing it in a way that is closer to humans, and therefore you're not going to get the same paragraph 37 time problem. But ultimately you don't know. And ultimately the crazy thing, which I think everyone struggles to get their head around, is even the designers of these systems don't actually know how they work.
Yeah.
Okay. They can't tell you how it is judging, yes, that's a good essay or not, or yes, that's a face or not. And actually, obviously, facial recognition is something that at passports is high stakes. And what you've got, a lot of people who design these facial recognition models, they will actually pay red teamers to attack the model. Like it's, an adversarial attack to try and work out what exactly is it say, why does it say this is a face and this isn't? And what is really weird is they will find that you can change one pixel, which to a human eye, they wouldn't even notice that pixel change. And that will change the AI's judgment about whether it's a face or not. And that, as I say, this is a problem across the board in all AI. But where it hits home with writing, as I say, is that these early models where you could look under the hood, when you looked under the hood, you found they were weighting on length, makes them very gameable. Now we've got more sophisticated models. We don't really know how they're working or how they're judging. They're definitely doing a better job than just marking on length, but we still don't quite know how they're working. And so when you don't know that, there is always the risk. And again, these assessments are a relatively high stakes environment. There is always the risk that they can get gamed.
Yes.
Actually, one of the points I made in my book in 2020 was that if you have an entire system, so I was saying this way before LLMs, if you have an entire assessment system where the AIs are doing the marking and the kids know the AI is doing the marking, the risk you have is that even if it's not a very gameable system, kids will try and game it.
Right.
And actually, I think one of the advantages for human comparative judgment, I say this in the book and I stand by it, is that you kind of want to set up a system such that the only way to game it is to do the thing you want.
Yeah, yeah.
And the great thing about human comparative judgment is really kind of the only way to do well on it is to write something that humans like. And so I think, and when we're thinking about AI, as I say, even in moderately high stakes situations, we've got to be thinking about the second order consequences of what happened. So it's not just, does this model work well to begin with? It's what will happen when this model goes out in the wild and everyone knows it's out there? What's going to happen next? And as I say, if it weren't for that, as I say, we'd have an AI marking essay from the 60s if that wasn't the case.
This is fascinating, this, Daisy. If I
Yeah.
just take you back to, so was it 2022 when kind of ChatGPT's and you're
Yeah.
having this kind of no more
Yeah.
marking meeting? If it had have nailed the handwriting recognition,
Yeah.
would you still at that stage have been skeptical that it could do the analysis of the piece of work? Because there seems to be like there was kind of two issues you were grappling with. It couldn't even interpret it for one, but if it could interpret it, would you have been confident? And the reason I ask is, what I found fascinating about your journey, you've been very open about this, is you were quite skeptical, right? And what I love about your post now is you always refer back to, like you said, 3 years ago, this is what I said here. So back in 2022, were there kind of two separate issues? Whether it couldn't read the writing, and even if it could, you wouldn't have been confident that it could do anything useful with it.
Definitely. And I think those are two still separate issues. So you're right, handwriting transcription is one thing, and then marking it is another. And actually, to begin with, ChatGPT 3 didn't solve handwriting recognition. And actually, if we want to talk more about handwriting recognition, it is still a difficult problem. It isn't actually completely solved, but it's way, way further than we thought in November 2022. So actually, our initial trials with marking, we weren't getting it to transcribe. We were using handwritten pieces that we'd had typed up by humans. So a lot of our initial studies were on that set of scripts. But you're right, yes, fundamentally there are two issues. The handwriting recognition is now so much better than we thought it was possible. It is not perfect. And you're right, like if you read our Substack, we have had some real ups and downs over the last few years, and we can kind of go over those. And I've reserved the right to kind of, we keep changing our minds. We change our minds, 3 times, what is it? 10 times before breakfast.
Yeah, that's it.
I think that's, we've got a system that is working well and is useful. I think that a lot of the theoretical flaws and issues with large language models still remain. But not just in what we're doing, but across the board, you can recognize those theoretical issues and think they're a problem and still think that it's a useful system delivering value. That would be the place where I am at the minute. And I think, again, in the wider AI debate, there is a very interesting process versus outcome debate, which is actually kind of very similar to, I talk about this in my book about football, about VAR. You can see it also when people talk about people talking a lot at the minute about human rights, not in human rights, international law. What is more important, process or outcome? So if you break a load of rules or you don't even know what the rules are, but you get the right outcome, is that okay? Conversely, if you follow all the rules and you follow all the steps, but you get to the wrong outcome, is that okay? And obviously the dream world we want is you follow all the rules and you always get the right outcome.
Yeah.
I get that. That's what we want. But we're not in that world in a number of ways. And I think, as I said to you before, the really crazy thing about a lot of deep learning AIs, even the makers of it don't know how it works. And so within AI, there's a bit of a kind of a battle between people who think that not knowing how it works is just fundamentally problematic and just is always going to be a problem, and therefore these models are junk. And people who, they're not the other extreme, would say, who cares how they work? They're doing great things. Doesn't matter. Again, I tend to take a somewhat moderate-ish position here. My dream is we can have all the rules and we know exactly how it works and it gets to my outcome. That's my dream. I think, as I say, the position I'm in is the fact we don't know how these systems work does cause problems. It causes actual practical problems. And a major practical problem it causes is they're quite probabilistic, and you don't always know that, as I said before, one of the advantages of old AI models was that they were consistent. You gave them something, they always spat out the same thing. Actually, they don't do that anymore. LLMs don't do that. And that's their strength. Almost their strength is that they don't do that, but it's their weakness. We just don't know what they're going to spit out or why they're spitting out. So the problem is when you hit errors and you hit problems, it's not like you just go in and you go, oh, that's an error, we just fix that. It's like you're stuck going, oh, what do we do? Is it, do we retrain the model? Like what has to happen? And so I do think not knowing how they work causes problems. Like I'm not blasé about that. But I think you can go too far the other way and say, well, these things have no use. And it's like, well, no, but they obviously do. And I think you can see that in an earlier debate with this about, Google Translate. So there's an earlier sort of similar debate within the AI world about this. And again, you have some people saying, well, Google Translate, it makes all these silly errors. We don't know how it's working. It's not as good as an expert human translator. Like, therefore, it's junk. And it's like, well, look, a lot of those critiques are true, but it's obviously not junk. And it's obviously adding loads of value to people. And to go back to my original point, like, it may not be as good as an expert human translator, but like, the expert human translator who can translate between, I don't know, like Estonian and Peruvian, like how many of those exist? And actually, I'm not actually sure Google Translate can translate between those, but like, do you see my point? Like, Google Translate, like is adding value because you can't access expert translators in a whole range of these different world languages. And if you could, they're hugely expensive, and it's someone who's have to dedicate 20 or 30 years of their life to that. And so even if you have something that isn't perfect, like it's still adding tons of value. So that's kind of where I sit.
Let me ask you, before we dive into, because I've got kind of four areas of kind of teaching and learning I want to get your take on. But just one more, might be a daft question this, Daisy, but we've spoken over the last decade or even longer on this show and just in person about one of the reasons and I might be putting words in your mouth here, but one of the reasons you're such an advocate of comparative judgments is because humans are bad at absolute judgment, right? So the whole strength of it is, and you always use the analogy of height, right? It's if you got two people, if you get one person, you can't tell how tall he is. If you got two people, you know which one's taller. Well, what's the kind of end game with AI here? Do you think, is AI going to be good enough at absolute judgment that you don't need comparative judgment? Or is the role that AI is playing, it's just going to help scale comparative judgment?
Yeah, so really good question. So when we started out with getting AI to absolutely judge. So we kind of like abandoned the comparative judgment aspect. And we said, let's just ask the AI its opinion. And I would say that's what most people in this space are doing. And there obviously are now, we have like lots of competitors. There are a lot of people doing AI marking. There are a lot of people who are like, never spent any time in education. Who like, it just seems like the obvious thing. I think if people think, hey, how can we use AI like to set up a business? I know we'll get it to mark essays.
And that's all absolute, right? Like that's everything I've seen.
I would say, like maybe I'm missing something, but I would say every other kind of organization I've seen in this space is basically doing absolute judgment.
Yeah.
And that's where we started to. Like, even though we're comparative judgment moonies, we started with absolute judgment because it kind of just seemed obvious.
Yeah.
So we started with the whole, like, here's a piece of writing, here's a rubric, what mark would you give it?
Yeah.
And again, you can see this on our Substack, like we tracked all of this. It was underwhelming.
Yeah.
And it ran into all those problems I talked about at the start. And this again frustrates me. There's a lot of published material about how AI is, the absolute judgment, like it's working great and it's better than humans. And again, I'm like, and it was, and those stats, I said to you, 1968, right? Like, show me the second order effects. So you have a load of people like I feel like you've got, I don't know, to sound like too negative, but there's a lot of people like working ivory towers, like turning out academic essays based on 20 pieces of writing and in no kind of real world, scenario of like, but what happens next? What happens when you do this for 20,000?
Yeah.
And then you've got like also a lot of people who understand the technology and have like set up overnight, but like have no concept of, reliability, validity, whatever. And what I would say is that, sorry. Yes, it is absolutely true. If you put in 20, 30 essays, ask the AI its mark, you can come up with some stats where it'll look pretty decent. Again, might look better than the average human. Again, like, it's probably not as reliable as those ones back in 1968, but it's still pretty reliable. And you can go, hey, it's working. But what we found is when you start to kick the tires, it starts to fall apart. So again, what we find is big outliers. Right. So big places where you might have overall decent stats, but you'll have like a handful of essays that there's massive disagreement between the human and the AI. And you're looking at it and you're going like, why? And again, goes back to that problem I talked about.
Yeah.
You can't just pull the hood up and tweak a couple of things in the engine, put it down again. It's like, you just go, why?
Yeah.
And you're stuck. Okay. The other thing is, all kinds of LLMs have all kinds of like their own biases, and often those biases are very different from human biases.
Mm-hmm.
So we've written a lot about human bias. Human bias is a problem. AI has kind of weird different biases. So like recency bias, it will kind of favor things that it's seen more recently than other things. All kinds of like odd things that when you start kicking it, you uncover. So what we were finding is the absolute judgment, you were coming out with stats where, if you want to make that argument, you can go, hey, this is amazing, it's better than humans. Yeah, you go make the argument, but you kick the tires, it falls apart. So after like too long, probably stuck doing that, we went another way, and we thought to ourselves, well, look, the whole point is comparative judgment. Like, humans are better at comparative judgment. Let's have a go at getting the AI to do some comparative judgment. And the other reason why this is so interesting is human comparative judgment is the gold standard of human judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also the form of human judgment that is used to train these models. So you might have seen this if you're ever chatting to ChatGPT. Most of the time it will give you like an answer, and sometimes, have you ever noticed, it gives you two answers and it says, what do you prefer?
Yeah, that's right.
That's comparative judgment. And if you pick A, it basically goes back to the model and it says like A is better, weight towards A. So if it's doing that with 1 million people and 1 million people pick A, it's then sending a message back and going like, overemphasize A. We want to be more like A, right? So comparative judgment, human comparative judgment, is used to train these models. And we thought to ourselves, well, why not get the AI to do some comparative judgment? Like, if humans find comparative judgment easier, maybe that AI will.
Yeah.
And basically, to cut a long story short, yes, the AI is better at comparative judgment than absolute judgment.
Yes.
So what we've done, and then the other thing about that is, not only is the AI better at it, but it allows us to integrate human judgment in a way that's much easier.
Right.
So if you're using absolute judgment, say you got 30 essays and you want the AI to help, well, you can get the AI to mark 30 of them, and the AI gives it a mark. Absolute judgment, you've given it a rubric, gives them a mark. And how do you check it? You could go in and mark a sample.
Yeah.
Right? And then say what you do. Say you go in and mark a sample of 3 and one of them's wrong. What do you then do?
Yeah.
Do you go and mark a sample of another 3? Okay, they're all okay. Okay, are we all right now? And what I think we ended up, and what I hear to a lot of people, is like the process of checking the AI is right. It ends up being, well, I may as well done it all myself in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay? Again, the advantage of using comparative judgment is, first of all, the AI makes fewer errors, because the comparative judgment, like, it seems to be like humans in that sense. It doesn't make many errors. But the other advantage is you can get humans now to do a proportion of the judgments, and you can measure the agreement between the humans and the AI. And we can also give you a list of all the major disagreements.
Yeah, nice.
And actually, to go back to the point I made right at the start, these early essay auto markers where they went wrong, we think that when you are evaluating an AI assessment model, it is not enough to look at those metrics like percentage agreement. It's not enough to look at the metric of consistency. That actually what you have to do is a qualitative review of the disagreements. Yeah? That is where so any model, do you know what? Even if you get 95% human AI agreement, I still want to know, but what's that 5%? Because if it turns out that the 95% is getting that by marking on length, then I don't care. I would rather a model that had 80% agreement and wasn't marking on length than one that had 95% and was marking on length. Because that 95% one, it would degrade rapidly the minute people work out what it's doing.
Yes.
So what we do is we are getting about 80 to 85% human AI agreement on our comparative judgment AI projects. And that's the same as our human-human agreement. So again, like, initial thing, great, 80, 85% human agreement, 80, 85% human AI agreement, brilliant. But then what we do is we do a deep dive and we list all of the disagreements by size. And we say, like, what is going on with these disagreements?
Yeah.
And the really remarkable thing is that so far, and we've done about 400,000 pieces of writing so far, the disagreements, you can sort them by scale. So there are some really big ones, some really small ones. And what I mean by that is, I'll just explain this, then I'll give the punchline. We get the humans and the AI to do all the judging. They do loads of judging. Humans do loads of judging, AI does loads of judging. And when they're judging, they're kind of seeing a pair, they're seeing two pieces of writing and saying which is better. So we'll end up with maybe 500,000 of these paired judgments, some by humans, some by AI. And then what we do is we use all of those judgments to create a measurement scale for every piece of writing. And again, we've been doing that just with humans for 10 years now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the guts of comparative judgment. And our scale runs from about 300 to 600. So every piece of writing will have a score on that scale. So then what we can do is we can take that score at the end and we can say, when we look at the disagreements, when the human and the AI disagreed, we will now have a final score for each piece. So what we'll say is some of those disagreements ended up being tiny.
Yeah.
And what I mean by them being tiny is maybe the teacher picked the one on the left and the AI picked the one on the right. But in the end, there was a 1 point difference between them.
Yeah.
So actually, yes, that's technically a disagreement. But we're not bothered about that. That's a coin toss.
Yep.
A human could have easily made that decision. A lot of the time you look at those and they're pieces that are really close in quality. So we don't have a problem with small disagreements. And there are some small disagreements we just think, you know what? I can see that two humans would argue over this, but it would be a legitimate argument.
Yeah.
What we're really more concerned about is when you get big disagreements. And one reassuring thing is there aren't that many. Most of the disagreements are clustered at the smaller end. There aren't that many. And, we put all the stats on our website, but we're talking of a fraction of a fraction, right? So you're often talking about the ones that are really concerning us are maybe 0.5% of all the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So we're zooming in on a very small number, but we still want to know what is going on. And what we've found so far is all of those really big disagreements, I would say so far, I genuinely would say all of them so far are the result of human error.
Wow.
Not AI error.
That was a good twist, that, Daisy. You built that up. That was good.
Well, and this was it. We were not expecting that.
No.
That is the biggest kind of killer evidence point for me saying, look, this is quite a big deal, right? Because I would say, anywhere else where you're looking and any other ways of doing this and all the things that have done AI auto-marking in the past, you've ended up with weird AI errors.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now is the disagreements, it's the AI correcting human error. And a lot of the time, the human error is due to handwriting bias. So a lot of the time when we see the big disagreements. So I remember when we completed our first trial project with this, just under a year ago, just by chance, I was visiting a school that had taken part in it. And I had a meeting scheduled with the member of staff who had made a judgment where there'd been a big disagreement. And I put it in front of her and I said, look, the AI's disagreed with you here. I said, argue back. I said, I'm not on its side. You tell me it's wrong. And she looked at them both and she knew both the students. And she said, no, that's my mistake. She said, I've made a mistake there. She said, and it's the handwriting. She said, I know that boy and his handwriting's not great and I've been a bit unfair. So I don't want to overstate this because we're talking about a fraction of a percent. So I don't want people to go the other way and go, oh, humans are terrible. But what I'm saying is at the minute, the AI does seem to be functioning well in terms of it is catching human error. I'm going to put one caveat in.
Yep.
This goes back to what we said before about the two-stage process we have with the AI. The first stage is we now do get it to transcribe the handwriting and we then get it to judge. So when I say there's been, the AI is basically, there's been no big errors, I'm talking about when it comes to actually making the judgment.
Yeah.
What I will say is there are actually still issues with the handwriting transcription. The handwriting transcription is not perfect.
Yeah.
And it's actually thrown up, I think, some bigger kind of issues for me because what it will do a lot of the time, the AI, and not a lot of the time, but sometimes it will what we want it to do is just provide a completely a neutral transcription of what the kids have written. So if they've crossed things out, if they've made mistakes, if there's errors, we want it to just faithfully reproduce that. And what a lot of these large language models can't help themselves doing, they can't help themselves improving it. They can't help themselves trying to impose a sense and a meaning on it when there is none. So there are problems where it will just make stuff better than it is. So actually where we see problems is at that stage. So we will get teach schools come to us and say the AI's made the wrong decision here. And they'll be right, the AI's made the wrong decision. But it's made that wrong decision. It's not the actual judgment that's flawed. It's the underlying transcription. The transcription has produced a piece that is much better than it actually was.
Yes.
If the kid actually had written that, the AI would have been right to say it was better. Okay? So what I'm saying is the judging faculty of the AI is pretty good. The transcription is not perfect. So we're still working on that. We've got a bunch of things we're doing to try and improve that. I think that is solvable though.
Yeah.
And for me also, I think that's for me, like in some ways, like less of an issue than the judging. You know?
Well, yeah. I mean, it 100% feels solvable. So let me ask you a big question on this one, Daisy. And we're kind of gone deep into the assessment side of AI, which we're always were with you on the show. It'd be criminal not to. So let me ask you just one more thing about this assessment. So we've been wrestling with this with Edie, like. We did some work with Google on an AI tutor, and what we always stressed is that we've got to keep the human in the loop, right? Yeah. So our piece of research involved the AI generating messages to give to the kids, but then it was always that human tutor, the expert tutor, who would either approve those messages or not. And we were always I personally was blown away by the really small proportion of those messages that the human tutor said, no, that actually they're not good enough. It was much more the other case where actually the messages were better than the human tutor would have done, which seems like there's parallels with what you're saying there. So the big question I've been wrestling with, Daisy, and I'd love your take on this is, can we just remove the human? Like, well, are we at the stage where with your comparative judgment model, where the human, if anything, they're bringing the results down?
So yes and no. So as I said to you before, again, you look at the long history of this, the problem is never like the first iteration of the model. The problem is always the longer term issues, the second order consequences. So I think for us, given everything we know about how we're not quite sure how these models work, I think it's really important to keep some kind of human in the loop somehow. And I think the design of how you get that human in the loop is really crucial, because what you don't want it to turn into is the human checks everything and it just takes them actually twice as long as it would have done. And that's why I say, like, our model is actually really good and much better. That, again, another advantage of using the comparative judgment over the absolute is that you can do 10% of human judgments, 90% AI. You do 10% of human judgments, every piece of writing will be seen by a human twice. So I get loads of pushback of people saying we can't like to cut the teacher out. And I'm like, look, if you use our system, the writing will be seen by more humans than it was before.
That's great.
So I think that's the advantage of comparative judgment. It offers a very elegant and efficient way of including human oversight. The value of including the human oversight is, in a system where we don't quite know like what it's doing, it's really important to avoid any negative second order consequences. And those second order consequences are like kids trying to game it. Even if the kids can't game it, that's just them trying to game it is. Like, I often think this with a sort of related debate about AI plagiarism, when people go, oh, but we've got this like, soft plagiarism checker and it'll catch it. And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't actually think those checkers are accurate enough. But even if they were, you've still not solved the problem. You've caught the problem. But the kid, what happens now? They have to go back and redo it. Like, do you know what I mean? So I really feel that about having an AI human in the loop with marking as well, is that if the kids know there is a human embedded in it, it just stops at source any kind of fun and games.
It's really interesting.
Any attempts for them to try and write the same paragraph 37 times. So you just cut that out. So that's why it's important to have a human in the loop. Comparative judgment makes the human in the loop easier. The other important reason for the human in the loop is I do think there's a genuine issue about how we develop and train teachers and actually all professionals. And I think people are starting to realise something now, which is that maybe a lot of the work of junior professionals can be done very well by AI. But that work, and this is analogous to what we always say about teaching kids, that work, that junior kind of grunt work, is what turns you into the senior professional. And the AI can't do that senior professional work. And maybe even like for ethical reasons, we'll never be able to do that senior professional work. Therefore, we're still going to need senior professionals. And if we're cutting off the pipeline that delivers them, that is a problem. And you see this across the board. The reason I'm saying the term professional, I think you see it with lawyers.
100%.
Like, you're seeing a lot of like AI now that is doing a lot of the grunt work of junior lawyers more efficiently than them. But you can't just, there's this like assumption, I can just jump straight to being the senior pro. Like, you can't. Maybe not all of that grunt work, but quite a lot of that grunt work was necessary to get you to be the senior. So if we take this back to education to marking, I think there's a level of engagement with student writing that is necessary to be a good teacher. And never felt that involved writing out some banal comment at the bottom of a piece of writing. And I've always been very wary of that being held up as the benchmark. I do think you need teachers to be reading students' writing. And I think it's hard to develop as a teacher if you're not. So what I think you do have to bake in, maybe more for junior teachers, less for senior teachers, you do have to bake in some form of engagement with the student writing. So overall, I think where we've got our model to, it's supporting all of these places, these use cases, it's supporting all of these things. It's got to a point where if you do the 10% that we recommend, it doesn't take you very long. It does force an engagement with the writing. It does mean you're reading it. It does mean you're staying in touch with it. It's also, you've got a human judgment preventing a model collapse or preventing gaming and the second order consequences. And you're doing all that very efficiently. So that is the place where our model is. And yes, to go back to your original question, I do think the human in the loop is important. One more thing I'll say on the human in the loop, though, is that across a year, let's imagine across a school year, our default model is 10% human judgments. I think there could be places where you go to 0% across a year, but I wouldn't want that to be the default.
Yeah.
So what are the places where I'd say, okay, in this case, I can see why a school might say, I'm going to dial it down to 0% and this is 100% AI judged assessment. Maybe the run up to an A-level exam. And your kids have studied all the content, they've covered the syllabus, they're now just doing a few practice exams before the exam. You've done a load of stuff for them, across your 2-year course. In those 2 months leading up to the exam, you want them to do maybe 4 or 5 practice essays. Is it appropriate to say, to turn it around quicker and get it back to them quicker? Put it on 0%, 100% AI? Yeah, I think that's fine. So maybe instead of looking at it as what percentage should it be, for every assessment, I think it's legitimate to look at it across a year or across a course and maybe say, look, when you're starting out and getting to know a class and they're learning, you put it on a higher setting of human judgment. But as you kind of get towards the end and speed is really important and you just want to turn stuff around really quickly, then maybe can you take the human out of the loop for some of that? I think that's fine too. So I think you have to have the facility to have a human in the loop and then you can use it flexibly.
Great, Daisy. This is brilliant. So out of the 4 areas I wanted to talk about, assessment, we've boxed that. We've gone deep into that. Yeah. We've also started to tease one of the second areas I wanted to talk to you about. So I wondered if there's any more you wanted to add on this, and that's professional development. And I'll just tell you a bit of a story from me this week. So I love a bit of Claude at the moment. I'm the world's biggest Claude fanboy.
Okay,
So I've been using, for listeners who don't know, Claude is Anthropic's kind of large language model. And a couple of weeks ago they brought out Opus 4.6, and I'm loving this. So I'm using it to write diagnostic questions as kind of a thought partner. And what's brilliant, Daisy, and I'm having the time of my life with this, is I'll feed it a prompt. It'll write me a diagnostic question or a diagnostic quiz. And then I'll ask it questions like, why did you put question 3 there? Why was it not before? Or why did you choose that distractor? And blah, blah, blah. And then it gives me its reasons. And I think, about 70% of them, actually, that's really good. So I learn a bit, and then 30% I push back. But then I make a change, and then I say, right, here's my quiz. Ask me some questions about my decisions. And it asks me some questions. And then I'm really having to think, well, why did I put that? Daisy, I'm learning bloody loads here, right? From a professional development perspective, I feel like I'm having the absolute time of my life, but I'm an absolute nerd for this kind of stuff. But also, I've taught for 20 years, right? So maybe when we're talking about these kind of more experienced, I've been through the grunt work of, having to write questions by hand, test them out in front of kids, not a large language model, and so on. So that's my jumbled way of saying, what role do you think AI can play in terms of teacher professional development, Daisy?
So I totally agree with you on all that. And as I say, we've had our skepticism in the past. I still have some skepticism now. I think it's always good to ask the hard questions, but all the experiences you're talking about there, I've had similar ones. And it is kind of amazing. And you can learn a lot, and I feel it can accelerate how much you learn.
And do you think you could have those with any experience, in the right context, or is it only because we're old these days, right?
Yeah. I think it goes back to that point I was making about the junior professional and senior professional. I think the thing you and I have always argued about education, about kids, is that they're not experts,
Yeah.
and therefore you have to teach them differently.
Yeah.
And that you can't just look at an expert and go, oh, the expert's doing A, B, C, let's teach that to the kid, right? I think there's now a similar point we can be making about senior professional, junior professional. So if we take you an example, they're like a senior professional, like you've got years of experience without AI of writing multiple choice quizzes. So you're now using AI. I think, yeah, that sounds like an amazing way where you are getting it to explain its reasoning, asking you to do that. And it's incredible. And it's like having, in that sense, I agree with you. It's like having like just a full-time research assistant who's always on, never gets
correct.
tired,
Yeah.
and you can just throw ideas at. But I would query if that is the right thing for a junior professional to do. And I would say if we go back 20 years to young Craig, younger Craig,
Yeah.
is that the best way for Craig to develop his understanding? And I'm not sure it is my issue. So I think we're all going to have to do a lot more harder thinking.
Yeah.
And I think what we've done in the past with professional development, and I mean professional development here across a range of professions, not just teaching,
Yeah.
like there probably has been an element of ad hocery to it, of just like, there is stuff you can just pick up on the job. And we all know that just picking things up is not optimal.
Yeah.
But actually with people who have got some decent sort of literacy and numeracy skills and, maybe, above average sort of general intelligence, whatever, that they will pick stuff up in that new environment and there'll be a little bit of structured learning and a bit of it's ad hoc and you're just expecting them to then get stuff. And that's kind of worked. And I think the problem you're going to have now is that's not going to work anymore because, and go back to that lawyer example, I don't think it'll be as acute in teaching actually, because there's always going to be, so I think teachers of primary, most to secondary, like definitely up to 16, I think teachers are like AI proofed. Like people ask me about like AI proof professions. I always say my mum was a hairdresser, my dad was an electrician, and I feel like those are massively AI proof professions because they've got like a manual element. The AI is not that good at those yet. Like the kind of manual element in new, novel environments where you can't standardize the environment. I think teaching is also kind of quite proof here because, you kind of need, there is a physical element to it. We tried in COVID putting kids in front of screens and, we had an enforced experiment on that and it didn't work. So I do think this is actually not as acute an issue for teaching. I think it's like super acute in something like law.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the standard training methods in law, where basically people kind of learn on the job with a little bit of structure around it. I mean, yeah, is that going to hold in a world where a lot of the work that those junior lawyers were being paid like quite a lot of money to do can now be achieved at a fraction of the cost? It can be completed at a fraction of the cost by an AI, right? So then you're in the situation, well, maybe you need like fewer junior lawyers, and then you have to train them on stuff that like there is no economic value. You're just doing it so they can learn.
Yeah.
And then you're starting to think about things like the return of like the old style apprenticeship model.
Mm-hmm.
So like a medieval apprenticeship model where it's like, someone's paying, you're paying a master so that you can just be near them and learn for 7 years. And actually it's going to be 7 years before you've got anything to add that is economically valuable that someone will pay you for, right? Like you're going to be 3 years into that course and you're still not at a point where you're better, where you're producing anything that someone will pay you for. There's all kinds of really tricky things to think through here. I don't think they are as acute for teaching. So to go back to your original point about professional development, I think there's still a lot that teachers will learn by kind of doing the job. We still need to just be good to be more structured and intentional about what we do in our dedicated professional development time. But I think that teachers, there's always going to be a need for adult humans to be spending like structured time with younger humans, which is like a very high level kind of view of where teaching is. So yeah, but yeah, I would be slightly wary of how LLMs are being used in professional development. I can see the pros and the cons.
What about when it comes to like resource creation and lesson planning? Because this is something I wrestle with, Daisy, right? Because
Yeah.
you'll have seen the same as me, where you go into some schools and everything's pre-planned. So there's like
Yeah.
a PowerPoint for
Yeah.
every lesson, and it's either been bought in or it's been planned by the head of department or whatever. And fingers crossed, it's of high quality, or higher quality than a junior professional, to use your terminology, would produce. And that junior professional, the NQT or whatever, they go into their room and they deliver that slide by slide. And my thing there has always been, it's probably a good in the short term or better in the short term for those kids in the moment, because it's probably going to be a better learning experience than certainly I would have been able to do at that age. But unless that junior professional has a chance to wrestle and ask questions about why that slide, why that question, and so on, they're not going to develop. And it feels to me, I don't know whether AI is better for this because you can have that dialogue. So if you could say, I'm teaching my year 8 bottom set tomorrow morning, adding fractions. Last lesson they did equivalent fractions. A few of them struggled with this. How should I start my lesson? Blah, blah, blah. And then it would bang you out a worksheet or something. And then you could, if you wanted to, you could start quizzing it. So on one level, it feels to me, both in terms of professional development and lesson planning and resource creation, that AI could be an absolute godsend for this. Certainly a step above the pre-prepared PowerPoints. But then at the same time, I think, what's stopping teachers just saying, do me a worksheet on fractions, out it comes, and then delivering it? What's your take when it comes to lesson planning, resource creation?
So I think this is one of those where it's like, we have to live in the world we're in and not in the ideal world I wish we lived in. Now, in the ideal world we wish we lived in, we would have teacher training that was far more integrated with the resources you'll be using.
Yes.
So I don't think it is great for every teacher to be designing all their resources from scratch. I also don't think it's great for every teacher to be delivering pre-delivered lessons that maybe they've just seen the night before. Right? But I think what actually should be happening is, when you're training, I think you should be training with a specific set of resources. And learning how to use those, and learning all the design decisions behind those. Like, that is the model. That's the optimal model. And actually, there's some places where you get towards that. So, for example, there's some phonics programs that have very specific resources and a lot of training that is associated with those resources. So you can go, I've been on it, the Read Writing Ruth Miskin's training course, 2 days long, and it's baked into the resources. And you're learning about like the design decisions behind why it is like this. That is how we have to be. And like, so again, to be honest, like in other professions, like I don't know like what the analogy would be, but I can't imagine like as a doctor, like, when you're in training, that people are just completely agnostic about, I don't know, the tools that you use. And it's like, we'll just train in this generic sense. And then you'll go out into a school and actually, they'll all be doing, you train in a hospital, you train one way and you go into a hospital and they might be, using all these different tools and different systems. And it's like, oh, you just pick that when you get there. It's like, there is the standardization goes back like a layer before. And the standardization is baked into the training. And I think for all that, I think teacher training has improved a lot in the last 10 or 15 years. There is a level at which it is just still quite generic. And I'm not blaming anyone for that, because it's kind of the way our system is. But I would be thinking to myself, when I train, if you are going into a school and you're going to be teaching an inspector calls on day one, I actually think your training needs to be in like, I do think you can say there are optimal ways, maybe not an optimal way, but there are better and worse ways of teaching and inspector calls. And I don't think it should be your responsibility to be creating all from scratch. I also think there is a problem with, you just download like something, on the internet, however well designed that is, you haven't thought it through. What needs to happen is that optimal set of resources, you need to have spent 6 weeks with that when you were training, going through it. And then, maybe like making tweaks. And maybe like thinking like, for the context I'm going to be in from this specific school, like these are potential ways I might need to dial it up or down, or change this or that. And maybe at that point, I could bring in ChatGPT to like tweak it here or there. So I think the problem I have here is that would be the ideal system. We are not in that system. Given that we're not in that system, is ChatGPT going to be good or bad? Like, people are going to be using it, right? And they're probably going to be using it, as you say. I think it'll be a little bit like, so when I started teaching, PowerPoints were like, everyone used them, but there were people in my department who were old enough to remember the pre-PowerPoint world.
Yeah.
And I remember a teacher, my mentor, saying to me, in my day, the lesson plan was Macbeth Act 3, Scene 1.
Yeah.
That was the lesson plan.
Yeah.
There were no slides.
Yeah.
Um, obviously, there were overhead projectors, whatever, the what have you. I think there's an analogy in lots of ways to what happened when like PowerPoints arrived. And I think what happened with PowerPoints is they made it way, way easier for people to create their own lesson. They probably did make it way, way easier for like, really amazing teachers to do amazing things. They also made it easier for people. I think probably on average, they probably increased the workload actually. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. You can argue that.
Yeah.
They put an expectation
Yeah.
that, you have to do that. I think they also increased the potential for busy work.
Yes.
So I remember once sitting in a staff room, like marking some books, staying on a bit later in the evening, and a friend was there and I was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, I just, got to find the perfect image for my superheroes lesson."
Yeah.
And he was literally he'd spent like 15, 20 minutes going through Google Images, looking for the right image.
Yeah.
And that, I always think back to that because I think, do you know what? What he'd be doing now, he'd be on Claude or he'd be on ChatGPT or whatever, or Nano Banana. And he'd be like just tweaking it again and prompting it and getting the next little thing.
Yeah.
Like, is that a good use of time?
Yeah.
So I think the point is, these tools are going to give people a lot more kind of power and autonomy. And there'll be some people using it in good ways, some people using it in less good ways. I don't have a problem with people using it. Of course not. I think, probably will in some ways. Again, with all these things, you can say to yourself, your instant thing is, oh, it'll save people time. And actually, what if they just go down rabbit holes? And there's a whole thing with coders where you ask them how much time they're going to save with ChatGPT or Claude Code or any of these coding tools. And they say, oh, I'm going to save, it'll take me, half the time. And then actually it takes them half as much time again, because they have to go back in and like correct things, whatever. So like, I'm not going to tell people not to use it. And if you're in a world where you're still doing a lot of the planning and the lessons your own, it's going to help you. Like, I definitely look at it and think, yeah, if I had this when I started teaching, I was in a school where we didn't have any centralized resources. I was like on my own. I was up until like 1 a.m, planning 5 lessons the next day. 100% it would have made my life easier. I don't actually think it would have necessarily compromised my development as a teacher either. I think it probably would have made my life easier. I think it'd be interesting, like, how much easier would it have made my life?
Yeah.
Like, would I just end up going down rabbit holes? I don't know. Even if it did make my life easier and did help me get to somewhere better, I still think like that is not the kind of pressure point what we need to be fixing. We need to be fixing the fact that people are training in these relatively generic ways.
Yeah.
I think you need to integrate the training and the resources.
Interesting. Brilliant, Daisy. One more area to ask you, and then I'm going to ask you whether I've missed asking you anything. So the last area I just wanted to talk about was personalised tuition for kids. What role do you see AI playing there? Because again, this feels like something that's both incredibly popular and has got big potential, but has got big potential issues as well. What's your take on personalised tuition?
Yeah, so I think I would, you're the expert on this, and I would defer to you on a lot of this. And I will always say to people, the study that, Edie and DeepMind did is, for me, like a bit of a gold standard in this area. I did write a bit about personalised tuition platforms in my 2020 book. It's a little bit out of date now. I'd actually kind of stand by it. Still a lot of what I said. And I think there is a role for personalising. You can use these chatbots to personalise what the kids get. I think I said recently in a Substack, I think there's 4 big questions any personalised tuition platform's got to answer. And I think what you did with DeepMind is the best answer I've seen so far to a lot of those. You can read my post, put it in the show notes, like the 4 questions I talk about. We can run through them here. I think one is, we've got a bit of a naive surface understanding that we think education is about explanation.
Yeah.
We think, oh, in order to learn something, I just need to read an explanation. It's like, well, in that case, you didn't need ChatGPT, like the printing press would have cracked education. Yeah. We've had scalable, reproducible, accurate transmission of knowledge for half a millennia.
Yeah.
Like everybody doesn't understand, like, or thermodynamics. Okay. So like what, there must be something more. And the something more is like, obviously like the practice, the question and answer sets, the problem sets. Okay. So I think there's this very like superficial thing of, I can ask it a question and it'll give me a perfectly brilliant explanation. It's like, that's not, that's not learning. So we need question and answers. That'll be my first sort of challenge. I think the other big challenge I have is, I call it, I put it under a bunch of headings like structure, motivation, discipline. You can call it what you like, but ultimately there have been very good personalized tuition programs around for decades. Again, it's one of these, like you go back to the 60s with the AI sort of markers. There's actually some pretty decent intelligent tuition programs that have been around for, best part of half a century. Like, and they personalize probably, better than one teacher in a class of 30 can do. So you have to grapple with like, why did they not work? And one reason I think is that, again, go back to the COVID experiment. Are you asking kids to sit in front of a screen all day?
Yeah.
And I think the reason why a lot of these models can get quite high scores in the lab, but then like don't scale up and are not being used across 8 million kids in 20,000 schools in England, is that, are you really saying like our default model for education is kids sitting at screen 5 hours a day? And you don't have to be like a rabid technophobe to think that might not be ideal, So, those would be my two big, I'll say those are my two big ones. I think the other one I talk about is, the hallucinations. And we can talk about that, the error rate. So let's sum it up. I'll sum it up as three, right? I'll sum it up as three things. The personalized tutors can't just provide explanations. They have to provide questions. When you start pushing into very precise questions, the problem of hallucinations comes up. And you've shown that you can reduce that down, but it still hasn't been eliminated. And that's still a problem. And then the third thing is the structure and the discipline. So what is our model of delivery for all of this? Is it kids sitting in front of a screen? Now, I will explain how I think you guys solve these problems. I think on the questions, not explanations point, your system is organised around questions. Love it. Reducing hallucinations. Again, I think your study showed you've got hallucination down to 0.14%, which I think is amazing. I think 0.14% is brilliant. It's also not zero.
Yeah.
And I think I calculated that, I think sort of an average use case, if every kid in Britain used it for 2 lessons a week, that would be 1 million errors.
Yeah, that was scary.
Yeah,
Those are the kind of numbers I didn't need to see. Spot on.
Yeah. But Craig, where I think me and you are in the same boat here, there was a really interesting podcast recently by Andrej Karpathy, where he talked about, he calls it the march, he's a coder, and he talks about the march of the nines. And it's the diminishing returns point, where he talks about going from 0 to 90% will take you a certain amount of time. It will then take you as much time to get from 90% to 99%. It will then take you as much time to get from 99% to 0.9%. And it will take you as much time to, it's constantly trying to squeeze the errors out.
Yes.
And trying to improve the accuracy. It's so hard. And people don't understand kind of how hard it is.
Yeah.
They see something that works 90% of the time. They go, oh, amazing, you've cracked it.
Yeah.
It's like, no. Right? Again, I feel people don't realise, like, at scale how this stuff compounds and the problems it causes. I've presented like the 0.14% error rate to groups of teachers. Like, oh, brilliant, problem solved. Like, no, I'm not having a go at you here because I think it is brilliant. I do also think it's fair to compare with the human error rate. I think if we're being honest, there's a lot of human math teachers who probably across the year have a 0.14% error rate.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's, entirely plausible. I think the difference would be is we have what you might call social technologies that deal with human error. And by social technology, what I literally mean here is if you're on the board writing up a maths problem and you make a mistake, like just a simple human error, a couple of kids put their hand up and go, miss, you got that wrong.
Yeah.
And you as a teacher, if it's kids who are generally reliable and like, not trying to cause trouble, you will look at it and go, oh God, if a couple of them have said it, I probably have made a mistake. Yeah.
Yeah.
What we don't have yet is like, what is that almost social technology for the AI, for the LLM. So when the LLM makes an error, and I'm kind of at the point now where, look, I don't think we're going to get hallucinations down to zero.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think, as I said before, they can add value. So I think we're in a world now where I honestly think we've probably squeezed them down to like as low as we can get them. I mean, like, it's going to be so hard just to get it to go from 0.14% to like 0.07, like to halve it. I just think that would be enormous again. Like, I don't know, So I think what we have to be focusing on now is what is the infrastructure we build around that, such that, what does a kid do if they hit something where they think it's an error? And obviously the problem you've got is a kid will hit a load of things where they think it's an error and it won't be an error.
Yes,
Wrong.
yes.
So again, as a teacher, you write up something that's correct and you'll have a kid go, Miss, you've got that wrong. And no, you haven't got it wrong. You're right. They're wrong. So what do you do? And I know you guys are working on that. And we are working on it too, because it's like, yeah, what do you do? Where you want some kind of human flag, like where do you build that in? So again, like in exam systems, we've got the examiner review. It goes up to a senior examiner. Like, what's the equivalent in this situation? So that's why, we were trying to build in our 10%, our human in the loop. So these are all the issues to be thinking about, which I know you're thinking about. And as I say, you've done I think what is the pioneering piece of work on this.
Brilliant, Daisy. Yeah, it's something we're wrestling with, and we're going to be doing our second DeepMind study. Is going to be we're kind of working on it now to try and address some of these issues. But I'm with you on that. I don't think it's going down to zero.
No,
I don't think you're taking the human out of there, which obviously has scaling and cost issues. But you've got to weigh those up against. Well, it's not trivial. We're dealing with kids' lives here, right? We're dealing with their learning. So. Yeah, how do things all balance? Yeah, fascinating stuff, Daisy. Love that. Okay, one more question for you here. Well, what question about AI have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
Yeah. So I think any discussion of education technology, any discussion of technology, I always actually like to start with the question, what is the problem you are trying to solve? Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Because it's so easy, because some of these technologies are amazing and they're pretty cool, right? But you can, and I've done it myself, you can just go down a bit of a rabbit hole, go, oh, I can do that. I can do, wow, And I think the worry is when you bring that into education, you just end up using it for the sake of it. So, like, my big question is, like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And just always bring that yourself back to that as like the North Star. And for us, what's the problem we're trying to solve? We're obviously trying to solve, actually, these three things would be really constant from day one when we set up Normal Marking, when we were just using humans. We're trying to solve marking reliability. We're trying to solve marking efficiency. We're trying to solve marking validity. Like those three things. Like at the minute, we want marking to be reliable and accurate, and it's not. It's very time consuming. We want to fix that. And the validity bit is about like what impacts it having on teaching and learning, the consequences of what you're doing. So we're just constantly coming back to those three things. And the point of the technology is, how does it improve reliability? How does it improve efficiency? How does it improve the validity, the teaching and learning, how students improve? I would say, you will have your own kind of North Star of what it is you're trying to improve. I think why you should always start with that and always bring yourself back to that is if you don't, you end up in, kind of odd situations. Like I saw a piece in The Guardian recently about a school who were kind of introducing AI, and I think there was something in it, was a school in Luton, and they were like, we've asked the kids, we've got the kids to kind of produce an image of like what Luton would be if it was a car. And I look at things like that and I think, the AI can do that. You could type in what would Luton be if it was a car and you'd get an answer. I don't know, you necessarily want the answer, but whatever. I haven't tried that. Like, knock yourself out, right? But like, actually, whatever you get back from that is like, why are you doing that? What problem are you trying to solve? Like, was there a world before it where everyone was like, if I could only get an AI to produce a picture of what Luton was like the car, I've cracked it. Sorry, I'm being unfair now. But start with the problem. Start with the problem. What is the problem?
Brilliant. Love it, Daisy. That's brilliant. But last one, and I'm going to ask all the guests in this series this. I want you to make a prediction. I want you to imagine jumping into the future. You choose the time frame. What do you think schools will look like? How much is going to change about the day-to-day, what a lesson looks like, the structure of a day, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? You pick the time frame. What do you think?
Yeah, my big thing on this, my latest analogy is Germany, modern Germany has no speed limits on its motorways. and car-free medieval town centres. And that is my analogy for technology in schools. I basically want like an infrastructure that is the Autobahn.
Yes.
A high-tech, high-speed, highly efficient kind of ring road around the school where all the data's whizzing around and the technology is solving everything. And people aren't wrestling with spreadsheets and wrangling with those all the time. And then I want classrooms that, basically are quite old-fashioned.
Yeah.
And
the reason for that,
yeah,
what's that, Daisy? Is that
yeah.
because you think that's the best way for kids to learn? Is it a social thing? What is it?
Yeah, so it's a mix of things. And look, I think the study you did, the kids were on Chromebooks, right?
Yeah,
Or they're
that's
on,
right.
yeah. And I think that, as I say, I'm open-minded. Like, I think that study's really good, and I don't want to be completely knee-jerk, like, on that, because you've done a lot of value there. I still think, like, particularly with primary age, I think that there are a lot of problems with screens. I think there are a lot of issues around how you read differently on a screen,
Yeah.
skim and scan more. I think even if you have a relatively locked down screen, there's always going to be other things you can do on it. And so just the potential for distraction
Yeah.
is high. And just the number of time I see kids who, a little bit of friction, they can flick and swipe, like that's a problem. I see it with myself. I often say this, like, I have a Kindle. I was a really early adopter of a Kindle. I love the Kindle. I think it's great. I still wouldn't be without it. I know that I read differently on a Kindle because there's always another book I could be reading with minimal friction.
Yes.
And so, like, actually the extent to which I kind of power through boring bits on a Kindle compared to a paper book is different. So that's a great example for me because I still think the Kindle, like, is amazing and I wouldn't be without it. But it's just being honest about, like, the ups and downs. So we all read differently on screen. We all read differently when there's ability to be distracted off. You can do something else very easily, like with minimal friction. So my bias is towards certainly at primary screen-free classrooms. And that's one of the reasons why when it comes to handwriting recognition technology, although it's still not perfect, I'm so invested in it
Yes.
because it makes the screen-free classroom so much like easier and more efficient to manage. Because you can have everything handwritten and do everything on paper and still, if you need to, have a really good digital record and storage of it and a lot of kind of efficient digital analysis and assessment. So handwriting itself, I think, has a lot of benefits for developing mind. I think kids who learn to write by hand compared to if they're typing builds in kind of redundancy in the brain, like the way you learn things. When you take handwritten notes, I think it's different from typing them. So a lot of my biases are primary and early secondary. I'll say primary, like no screens, early secondary, like minimal. Again, I want to be open-minded because I think what you did was really good and there are advantages. And I do think, I don't want to just be knee-jerk, like never, never, never. If somebody said to me for subjects like modern foreign languages and maths, where you probably, having someone expert, having like an expert LLM, you could get something working the way you've done it. If year 9, 10, 11 kids spent a couple of hours a week on that and you'd worked it out in ways that you'd sort of locked it down and they were doing, that's where they do their maths and their MFL. And then that also frees up time that you can have maybe slightly smaller classes elsewhere. And they're doing things where they're doing maybe like, you can do a small group visit to a museum. I think all that stuff is important, obviously. I think that, that kind of mix and blend. I think when it comes to reading, I do want to see more reading with paper books. So I don't want to say like knee-jerk no screens ever, ever, ever. That's why I quite like that medieval town centre analogy. I do think we need some protected spaces where there are no screens. And the younger the student, the more important those are. And then I think we just have to be really careful and intentional about where we're using screens and what we're doing and what we're expecting them to achieve, what the problem is that they're solving. So I quite like that's my analogy at the minute.
Good.
German roads.
You, as well as the queen of assessment and queen of AI, you're the queen of analogies as well, right? Like
I love a good analogy. Yeah,
you have the one on the Bradley's Science of Learning. You were doing the like forklift truck versus lifting the weights in the gym. There's some classics out there. That's great stuff. Right, Daisy, let me hand over to you. What should our listeners check out of your work?
So, if you've heard all this discussion about the AI market, you want to give it a go, AI comparative judgment, you can have a go for free. So we give people a free trial for to assess one class worth of scripts, 30 scripts, 30 essays. So if you want to try that out, we have a rolling program of webinars. I think our next one is end of April. You can sign up for that. You can also book a time with me. I'll set you up with them. So, we can give you that link too. And then if you want to stay up to date with everything we do, all of our research and kind of bigger pieces to it, all my analogies, then you can subscribe to our Substack. So actually, if you put 3 links in the show notes, I think our webinar page, book a time with me, and the Substack, those would be the 3 places.
That's the No More Marking Substack, one of my absolute essential reads. Absolutely brilliant stuff.
Awesome.
Daisy, always a pleasure speaking to you. Always learn loads. Thank you so much for your time today.
Nice one. Cheers, Craig. Thank you.